you just don't need a mediator. Mediation is appropriate when you can't come to an agreement. Ideally, you want to go into mediation before the conflict really escalates, okay? Because you want to stop it from getting to that point. Yeah, well, I like to say it's never too late, but certainly there are points at which they just have such a vast difference of opinion and bad perception of the other person, such a lack of trust there, that they wind up having to go to the next step, which is usually court. It doesn't have to be.
Welcome to Real Relationships, a real and honest podcast about the inside world of working with close relationships. I'm Alona Serpentine, a couples therapist, a sex therapist, and a relationship educator. Here, I draw the curtain on how close relationships work, interview other relationship professionals, share behind-the-scenes stories from my own practice, and also invite couples, families, and individuals of all kinds to speak about their journey and their real relationships. We as humans cannot live without others. This is why I hope that by sharing the stories and reality-tested information from real professionals and real clients, more people will enjoy fulfilling, supporting, and successful relationships. If you want to have one of those, or make your existing ones even better, and I can't imagine you are not, tune into our episodes released twice a month on Thursdays. And to stay up to date with what we have to share, subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform or join our Facebook group, Real Relationships. Stay tuned and stay real. I'm speaking with a family mediator and a separation counselor, Bonnie Douglas from Smoother Separations, about how to have a better divorce.
Bonnie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's a very exciting new thing that we are doing, and it's all about real relationships. I obviously know you professionally as a mediator, and sometimes there are cases that I just have to thank for your services for mediation, and I think it would be really good for our listeners to learn more about what mediators do and when they actually agree on it.
Yep, absolutely.
I'll start by asking you to share a little bit about your journey to becoming a mediator and what exactly do you do.
So the journey is kind of a typical one. I got my counseling, my grad depth counseling, and didn't feel quite congruent with what I was doing, enjoyed it. And I had done mediation with my ex-husband, and I popped an ad for become a mediator on my computer screen, and I thought, oh, that actually might be something really good to do. So I did my diploma. So you do a grad dip in family dispute resolution to be able to work with families who are going through the separation and divorce process. And interestingly enough, when I completed that, I thought, well, maybe this isn't for me.
Why so?
Because you are working with people who are in quite a high level of conflict, right? And so that can be challenging to do, to sit in between two people and hold a safe space who are just constantly in high conflict. But as I started to work with people, I found I was actually really good at what I do.
Right.
And I found it very, very rewarding. So there's a great satisfaction when I have two people who are telling me kind of opposite stories, and they each telling me the other person is never going to come to an agreement. They're completely unreasonable. Yeah, when I'm speaking with each of them, I find them to be very reasonable and pleasant. We have a good chat. And then I get them in mediation, and they're surprised that they actually can come to an agreement. And so it's a wonderful way of starting to repair that relationship. You know, they walk out of that relationship and they each have these monsters in their heads about the other person, and it's not true.
Their perception.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And you being a neutral party, you're able to buffer and
Absolutely.
For who they are and not for what they project onto
Exactly. So hopefully, obviously people are hopeful that they'll get an agreement and they won't have to go to court. But from my perspective, the greatest value in family mediation is actually starting to repair that relationship, because when you've got small kids,
Absolutely.
you know, the teenagers who have parents who are in high conflict love that, because they can manipulate the situation so easily. Yeah, parents need to work.
But also, I'm thinking about parents being parents forever.
Oh, absolutely.
So they have to be able to help each other.
Not only that, but be in the same room with each other. So if you think about your children, you know, they might be really young. You think someday you have dreams that they will get married and they'll have a beautiful wedding, right? Like, how horrible would it be if your child has to worry about what's going to happen during the wedding or the wedding reception if both of their parents are in the same room? Is it going to be, you don't even want it to be awkward, right? So, or is there going to be a blow up? So it's the last thing you want.
So it sounds to me that mediation is not just for an ongoing conflict between two partners or former partners. It's actually something that is of a very long-lasting value, and it's a lot about children. Is it right?
Oh, well, you know, we do mediation only for property matters. So I do get a fair number of people who have waited until their kids are grown and then said, well, now it's time. So property only, that's a totally different story. But we do get, I would say about 70% of my clients do have young children. And for me as a mediator, it's about preserving that relationship for the children's sake. And, you know, you're a counselor, you know what it's like. If you've got parents who are highly anxious or angry with the other parent, even if you don't say anything in front of the child, you have body language that the child will pick up on. Even if you're just picking the child up from the other parent's house, that kid knows you don't like them, right?
Yes, the tension is right in the air, and they feel it.
Exactly. They pick up on it. Children are little emotional sponges. They're far more sensitive than adults. And so that child then can develop the perception in their own mind that the other parent's bad, right? And all a child ever wants to do is be able to love both parents, to truly love both parents, and to feel they have permission from the other parents to love them. So to put that sort of an idea into a kid's mind, you know, some people say that's child abuse, right? You probably don't even know you're doing it, right? We get this a lot. I had no idea. I had no idea that when I pick my child up and I start asking them, did you get a bath? You know, why are your clothes dirty? What did you have for dinner last night? Those sorts of questions can give the child the impression that parent they've just been with is not a good parent.
And how do you think, or in your experience, that how does it affect the relationship between the child and the parent? Or what does it actually do maybe to the child themselves?
It can, well, we know from plenty of research that can actually result in a vastly increased risk of psychological problems or even physical health problems when the child is older. So what I like to tell parents who are in my sessions, if you want to have grandchildren and grandchildren who are in a healthy family, then you need to role model a really good divorce to your kids and keep your relationship as amicable as you possibly can. If you're in a relationship, by definition, there's going to be conflict, right? It's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
But it's the way you handle that and your attitude towards the other parent that will potentially damage your child for life. Okay? So it's really important to be very mindful of what's going on for yourself when you are thinking about the other parent, when you're interacting with the other parent, and get some help. There are a lot of counselors who can help you with that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you've been to mediation hopefully based on your professional background, but also based on your own personal experience.
Yeah. Exactly.
And how long have you been doing this now?
We're just over 3 years now. So, yes, I moved directly from the counseling into the mediation. And I absolutely love it.
Love it.
So, yeah, it's really good.
Why do you love it?
Because I feel like my breakup was really bad. Okay? Like, it was really, really, really toxic. And I felt that when I learned how to do mediation, I kept thinking there's got to be a better way. So I would say that I, as a mediator, tend to work more therapeutically as a mediator. So we have to be very careful not to cross a boundary and become a counselor to our clients, right? However, I would say that I do work more therapeutically with my clients. And I have a fair amount of success. And of course, there's no research done. Like, I've got no idea how my success would compare with other mediators' success. But when I can help them start to repair that parenting relationship, and then I can refer them on to other practitioners who can help them continue to work on that. It's just, you want to open that little crack, right? You want that little crack where there's some light shining through, and you're like, okay, so they're not the real monster that you thought they were. Now we've got to learn some skills about how we work together. Okay. So,
and being able to see partners to open up to this idea of talking to each other, of maybe learning new ways, and actually seeing how this rewards the couple in the relationship.
Yes,
probably quite rewarding.
Oh, it's absolutely. Of course, it's very rewarding. Yeah.
So when do you think mediation is at the end?
Well, mediation is intended to help people have discussions about issues that are in dispute, right? So if you've already come to an agreement as to how you want to parent your children, it's amicable, you just don't need a mediator. Mediation is appropriate when you can't come to an agreement. Ideally, you want to go into mediation before the conflict really escalates, okay? Because you want to stop it from getting to that point. Yeah, well, I like to say it's never too late, but certainly there are points at which they just have such a vast difference of opinion and bad perception of the other person, such a lack of trust there, that they wind up having to go to the next step, which is usually court. It doesn't have to be, but it's a very costly step. So
mediation is a cost.
No, the next step, court. The court, getting lawyers involved to negotiate on your behalf is extremely expensive, and that's what the next step involves.
And it sounds like mediation can be a more viable option for many couples.
Oh, absolutely. It's just so many people don't know about it.
Right.
Yep.
I understand that if you are applying for separation, there are certain cases when it's pretty much compulsory that you attempt mediation.
So the Family Law Act states that before a judge is able to hear your parenting matter, you actually must attempt mediation with a family dispute resolution practitioner.
Like yourself.
Like myself. So someone who's registered through the Attorney General's Department, okay? And so we are able to provide a certificate to parties that lets the court know that they've attempted mediation, right? We don't tell the court anything about what the matter was about. We just let the court know that mediation was attempted, all right?
And why do you think this is the case? Why do couples with parents? I understand it's only for couples with parents who are under 18.
Yes.
Why do they not go through this? And you understand?
Yeah, so the court put this in place, I think it was 2006. This was written into our Family Law Act, okay? And the purpose of asking parents to attempt mediation first was to give them as much opportunity as possible to come to their own agreement, because they know their kids best, right? Before they enter the court system. The court system is expensive. It takes a long time. You know, you're generally looking at a year to a year and a half. And, you know, there are ways of dragging that out if you want to, which just increases expense. But more importantly, from my perspective, you carry that stress. It's a very, very stressful process, right? And you carry that with you for months and months and months. So the court wanted to give parents that opportunity to resolve matters before they enter into the court system. Quite honestly, these days, if you attempt mediation, or even if you just get a 60I certificate, these are ways of getting one because mediation might not be appropriate due to severe domestic family violence. Usually the court, the first thing they're going to do is put you into mediation with the registrar of the family court. So it's usually the first step now. That was a change made last September a year ago.
Right. So you're saying not many people know about mediation as an option.
No.
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, because I think most people enter into marriage or a relationship thinking, well, this is it. This is forever, right? Why would I think about getting divorced? We're not going to get divorced. And so they don't start researching, what do I need to do? Okay, how do I go about this? Until they're in high conflict and they're very stressed. And the information that's out there is sporadic. It's very difficult to obtain. Most people, because of TV shows, assume, well, I'm just going to go lawyer up and we're going to go at it in court. I have to go to court.
So it's more the public than, I guess, the
education.
Public education. It doesn't talk much about mediators.
No.
It talks about lawyers. It talks about court.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this already, that you are not quite a counselor, and at the same time, it's very important to keep this line between mediation and counseling. So how would you separate counselor, like let's say a relationship counselor, like myself, a mediator, and a family lawyer? What are their differences?
Yeah. So there are, I guess, a couple of differences. If we take counseling first of all. So as a mediator, in the session, I am neutral, I am unbiased. My job is to help parties have a discussion, okay? And usually I assist them to do that through me, because as you know, if they're talking together, they're just going to automatically revert to their old habits, old ways of communication. But I can short circuit that, right? So I'm not invested in them solving a problem. A counselor would be invested in helping them solve their problem. They would be giving them tools on how to work together. They would be mediating to a certain extent in terms of helping the parties to have a discussion, but really you're trying to fix the relationship, okay? So I'm not trying to fix the relationship. That can be an outcome of mediation. That's when I usually hope that can happen. But I get to put my hopes and feelings aside. So additionally, in mediation, as an FDRP, it's my job to bring the voice of the child into the room.
And this is actually your angle on the whole mediation. From my understanding, Bonnie, and I may be wrong, but I understand that you will speak from the child's perspective.
Exactly.
Rather than from the relationship perspective.
Correct. And so, so the counselor is working with the parent, and I get to bring the kids in. I get to start testing things from the children's perspective. Okay. So that's kind of a basic difference as I see it between counselors and mediators. So lawyers are totally different. Okay. A lawyer can only act for one party. Okay. So the mediator is sitting in between the parties, and we're trying to hold that whole relationship in our hands, right? And hold the family in our hands. A lawyer must, they are bound to act only for one party. Okay? So, and it is their job to act in that party's best interest. And so you can see how once people lawyer up, it's very easy to get pulled apart, because it's like taking your
one lawyer against
on the other. Exactly. And it's kind of like taking your car to the mechanic. You don't know anything about how that damn thing works. And you just want a good mechanic who's going to be honest with you and not say, oh, you need to have this replaced. You need to have this replaced. You want somebody who's going to give you can really trust. But with lawyers, they're going to give you advice, right? So as somebody who's going through separation and divorce, you have no idea. You just have no idea what's going on. You don't understand the family law act. And a lot of people just rely on their legal advice without, I guess, using their critical thinking skills and thinking, okay, what are the potential consequences? of this action, right? So that can pull people apart. Really good lawyers will help their client understand here are the three things we could do, and here's what could possibly happen, right? Here are the options, right? So I could send your ex-husband a letter. It'll be a legal letter. Legal letters feel very threatening when you receive them. There's a certain language that is used in a legal letter, okay? So that might actually be helpful. Your ex-husband could come to the table, do whatever, reveal his bank account balances, whatever you're trying to get him to do. It could also make him extremely angry, okay? So another option, a good lawyer will say, why don't you attempt mediation first, okay? And the mediator is less threatening. We are truly independent and impartial and non-biased.
Right.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, from what I'm hearing, when both mediators and counselors, they work jointly with the couple, and they have different goals. Obviously, let's say the couple counselor wants the relationship to improve, wants maybe to guide the couple where they want to be in an amicable way, and it's all about the relationship, where a mediator still works jointly with both partners, but they represent the interests of a child. And I think it's also more about practical, pragmatic aspects of that parenting relationship.
Yeah.
And then a family lawyer separates the partners and only works with one of them, representing them legally, providing them legal advice, and giving options.
Correct. And I won't give legal advice. I can tell you what the family law says, okay, but I cannot give legal advice. I can also suggest you might ask your lawyer this list of questions, which can be helpful for the clients because they've got, they've got no idea about this whole process. And because I've got a certain level of experience and knowledge, I can say, oh, this might be a problem for you in the future. So why don't you ask your lawyer about it?
That's right. Okay. Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's so much clearer now where exactly mediators sit on that whole spectrum of people involved in helping and family. So who would be your ideal client?
My ideal client is usually it's a woman because 70% of relationships are ended by the woman, and they're usually the first ones to approach us, okay? So usually it's a woman who is having a really hard time communicating with their partner. They recognize that early, and before things get too hot and heavy, before conflict gets too high, they recognize that they might want to get some assistance in communicating with their partner, okay? Because I can educate people on what the realities are in the family law system. And sometimes people just need that education in order to say, okay, maybe this approach is not the one I want to take. I'm going to get everything. I'm going to force everything. It's their decision as to how things are going to play out, and they can calm down and be a little bit easier to work with.
Right. So that's probably who is going to contact you. And, there is a high chance that they will become your client.
Yeah.
And when it comes to actual mediation, who is that couple that you just love? What do they look like?
Yeah, the ones I really love working with.
Yes.
They are truly invested in their children's happiness and really the best interest of the child. It's hard as a parent, right? Because you're biased. Each parent is biased. And when the parents are really able to set aside their own interests and can see for themselves that some things they've been saying is really not necessarily in the child's best interest, but it's in their best interest. And when they can have that revelation and say, oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. I can set that aside now. Let's have a real discussion about what we want for our children. Okay? And those are my ideal clients.
So parents who are very invested in the best outcome for their children and who are willing to keep that as their priority and putting aside maybe some of their selfish interests.
Yeah, their own personal bias. And a good example of that is maternal gatekeeping. Okay. So maternal gatekeeping is a kind of a new concept that we've been talking about. Women as the biological mother of the child, the one who carried this child and birthed this child, and in our society is typically the one who's seen as the primary caregiver, the one who's going to be the emotional support for the children, be the soft puppy bringing up the child type of thing, right? Well, dad's going to go off and work, right? Or maybe she's working part-time. Women tend to grasp that role and hold on to it for dear life.
They carry it maybe as a shield or a badge of honor.
Yep, or identity.
Identity.
Okay. And when we come to separate, it's also the only area really where society has given us power, right? We're recognized as being the holders of the information about the children, right? Like we know whether the child needs a breastfeed, a nappy change, what they eat, what their nap routine is.
Natural.
All of that, right? Absolutely. Like we didn't have to learn anything, right? That's intuitive.
I wish this was my case.
Right? And I'm being a bit facetious, but we don't realize as mothers that our children teach us those things. Okay? So we learn that from our children. But we are perceived to be the experts in our children. And when you split up with your ex and you get maybe a 4 or 5-year-old child who's truly able to be with both parents on a 50-50 shared care arrangement. I mean, we know children are capable of doing it at that age. So by the time they start prep, that's a reasonable expectation. And so now you are threatening mom's identity. Okay. You are threatening her power in a society where we don't typically have a lot of power. And so women can hold on to that dearly. So it's heartbreaking to see perhaps a father who has, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and have mom say, no way, you are never going to have the children more than 5 nights a fortnight, which is typically the minimum the court would award.
But suddenly it's very heartbreaking and very sad.
It is. That's where it's the worst, because these kids just want to be with their dad, right? And it's like, oh no, he always returns them dirty, and I get all their dirty clothes back, and they have McDonald's 3 nights a week, and you're just like, okay,
there are things
there are worse things.
It's more important.
Exactly, and we know there's a huge body of research now that shows that dads can be just as good parents as moms in a different way. And both children desperately need to have significant and substantial relationship with both parents. And they desperately need that exposure to both parents because of the differences between them. It makes our kids far more well-rounded.
100%. And I think it's a very important point today that dads as good of a parent as moms are, and this is the healthy approach to parenting and to the relationship.
Exactly.
But I have to bring up the topic, which maybe some of our listeners can be considering. But what if their father is absolutely disinterested? What if the father is, let's say, not a good person?
Yep.
There is a danger. There is potential.
Yep. When we've got those cases, those are totally different cases. Okay. And we hear a lot about them, and they're not as common as you would think.
Right.
But there are a large number of people who separate, can do so amicably, and they don't even need a mediator, right? It's just, they can handle it in a very mature and easy manner. And so for the cases where we have risk concerns, so for example, I recently had a case where a report had been made by another practitioner to Children's Services. Okay. Now I cannot participate in a mediation or allow any agreements to occur where a child might be at risk. So those matters need to be handled appropriately. They need to be investigated appropriately. And there's another pathway through the court system for those types of matters. Okay.
And from my understanding, as soon as you have a suspicion of any foul play or if there is any abuse going on, you cannot mediate.
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I mean, technically I could. You can do anything you want in this world. You just have to live with the consequences, right? But it is not ethically appropriate for me to put people into mediation in that situation. Because again, my number one priority is the kids, right? My number two priority is both parties, psychological and physical safety. So equally, when I have clients who are not, maybe don't have the capacity to mediate. So I've had a couple of alcoholics who have been inebriated when they've spoken with me. And I've had to ring their lawyers and say, look, I'm sorry, but your client does not have the capacity. I think I strongly recommend that you engage in another form of negotiation on your client's behalf.
That's actually linking me to another question that I wanted to ask. Who is your absolutely nightmare from?
Oh my God, sociopaths.
The sociopath?
Yes, yeah, or people who have sociopathic tendencies. They have no capacity for self-reflection whatsoever, and they are very difficult to have in mediation. So, and of course, inevitably, we've got the other party is going to have all sorts of psychological problems themselves because they've been exposed to the sociopath or someone who has strong sociopathic or even narcissistic tendencies in their relationship. So it does make it very challenging to get to an agreement. However, we have ways of dealing with, we call them high conflict people. And I run a specific process for those parties that it's very rigid and it's very strict. And believe it or not, we get some agreements out of it where, you would expect, no, this is going straight to court. And I have had clients where I've thought to myself, oh my God, this is just going to be a really, really hard one. This is going to court. And we've wound up with agreements and everything's fine, right? It's amazing. Human nature. Humans amazing all the time. It's really good.
That's why you're probably a good mediator.
Yeah.
A couple of, I guess, practical questions that I think would be interesting. How much does the process normally cost?
That's a good question. That depends. I've had, in an ideal situation, you've got parents who are going to be able to come to an agreement on parenting matters within 1.5 sessions. So roughly, let's say 4 to 5 hours of mediation. And I always provide some back and forth by email afterwards because there's always that I go home, I never make anybody sign anything. Mediation is very much about, okay, you've been in a very stressful, intense time. You're emotionally exhausted. Go home and think about it. I've given you access to the agreements I've written out. Go home and think about it. So other people take...
Other mediators?
Well, no, other couples can take... I've had, what's my longest one? 3 full 3-hour sessions, so 9 hours of mediation. And there were still items that we had parked that were lower priority that had not been resolved. That's quite unusual.
And that's obviously the spectrum of hours depending on specific circumstances.
Yes.
But if you were to just provide maybe a benchmark for people looking at mediation, how much money should they have?
Yeah. So you should be able to get away from your mediation, and it's going to depend on your mediator because there are barristers who are going to give you mediation. They'll charge you $10,000 per day. Normally, you would be able to walk away from mediation having spent less than $3,000 each for parenting and property. Maybe less than $4,000 depending on the circumstances. Exactly.
Oh, wow. I mean, it sounds, to be honest, quite reasonable, especially if you compare to the legal option.
Oh, absolutely. So the feedback from the family court now is because, lawyers now have to reveal their case to the family, to everybody involved in the case. Okay, so both lawyers see what each other is charging,
nice.
And both parties see what everybody's spending. Okay, and so you're looking at somewhere north of $80,000 to run your case through the court system.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, 4,000 versus 80,000.
That's correct. Yep. And that's per person.
It's pretty straightforward.
It's very easy. It's a simple decision, isn't it? And you're going to be forced to do mediation anyway in the court system. So really, you might as well give it a go and see if you can resolve your matter. So for parenting matters, any agreements that are made are not legally binding in mediation, right? If you want to make it legally binding, you can get a lawyer to help you write up consent orders. You can also do it yourself by downloading the packet from the family court. Parenting orders are not horrendous to write up. Property is another matter entirely. It is complicated. And so that's where legal advice is needed. Okay. It really is needed. All I can do is suggest people get legal advice. But look at it this way. It's an insurance policy. Okay. And the reason for that is in order to make your property settlement legally binding, you will send it through the court. You don't have to show up in court, but you will ask the court to review your agreement and then seal it and make it legally binding. Okay. Because remember, when you get married or you're in a de facto relationship, your relationship owns everything. Okay. So you've entered into a financial contract as well as a marriage contract when you get married.
Right. Many people are not aware of that.
They're not. It's invisible. Nobody talks about it, but you do. And until you dissolve that financial contract, okay, so you dissolve the marriage with divorce. Okay, that's a separate filing in the family court. You dissolve your financial contract with consent orders. Well, that's the cheapest way to do it. You can make a financial contract to dissolve the previous one. That's going to cost you a fair whack because each of you needs a lawyer. So you can imagine that gets very expensive. Okay, so you file it within the court. You file your consent orders, and they're going to review it and decide whether they think it's just and equitable. So let's take a case where a couple has said, we just want to be fair. We're just going to split everything down the middle. 50-50, right? Most people think that's fair. But what we talk about is equity. And so let's say mom doesn't have a degree. She stayed home, hasn't worked for 18, 20 years. They've been together a very long time. He's very successful in his business. He's pulling in $200,000 to $300,000 a year, right? So a 50-50 arrangement is just not going to cut it with the court, right? Because her future earnings compared to his are just much, much less. Okay. So, you want legal advice around those things because you really want to make sure that if you're purely amicable, that's great, but you really want a lawyer to give you some advice as to whether that's going to pass muster with the court or not. Because if the court doesn't agree with you, they will actually requisition you and say, you will show up at the family court in 4 weeks' time and explain to us why you think it's a good idea. And that's when people panic, and it will cost you a fair amount of money. You'll need a last-minute lawyer, et cetera. So lawyers through this process are necessary. And, you get a fair amount of lawyers these days who just want to work within those amicable environments. Their ideal client is somebody who just walks in and says, look, I want to be fair to my ex. What do you think? Here's our financial situation. What do you think? And the lawyer gives them some legal advice and says, well, I reckon the court would award, let's say 50 to 60% to the wife. And they say, thank you very much. They go away. They negotiate. They come back and say, can you make this legally binding, please? Okay.
So, but this is more, from my understanding, about property matters.
That's the property side of things. Absolutely.
Which you specifically work with or not so much?
Yep. We work with that too. So some FDRPs are not trained in property, but I was trained in property. And so I handle parenting matters. I handle property matters. I handle parenting and property matters. And in fact, for property, I've teamed up with Annette Lakey from Lakey Family Law to do what we call our amicable separation package, where if you're truly amicable, you really, really want the best for each other. And my test for that is if the lawyer says that your 50-50 arrangement won't fly, but she should get 60%, how would you feel about that? And they say to me, well, wouldn't be happy, but if that's what it takes to get this done, and that's what's there, I'll do it. They're appropriate for that package. And you get out of that incredibly cheap. It's less than $2,500.
Less than $2,500?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. And that includes learning how to file it in the court. Then they pay their own filing fee to the court, which is like $200 now. Wow. It's just minimal.
You've shared already so much.
I know. It's so complicated. And that's why people's minds just go, they're under stress and then their head goes boom and they have to look all this stuff up.
Yes. And I kind of feel we really had a good start in introducing people to mediation. I think you've done a great job explaining some of the differences both mediation and family lawyers, also kind of what the key objectives are and who it's a good idea for. I would love to talk to you a bit more down the track to get more information and maybe some more stories to hear about real cases and how they pan out. If our listeners have questions or if they would like to get in touch, how can they find you?
Yeah, so my website is www.smootherseparations.com.au, and they can start there. There's a contact form, and they can book a free consultation with me. I say it's 20 minutes, but I have to say I never get out of a free consult in under an hour. And a lot of people who call me just are like, oh, thanks for that. Now I know I don't need mediation. That's great. I can just move forward. It's great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Real Relationships podcast. For more reality-tested relationship information, visit our Facebook group, Real Relationships. Or if you have a question or a guest suggestion for me to interview next, email me at podcast@alionaserpentine.com.au. Stay tuned and stay real.